call on Members' Order of the Day number 3.
Social Security Clothing Allowances for Orphans and Unsupported Children Amendment Bill, second reading.
Tracy Martin.
I move that the Social Security Clothing Allowances for Orphans and Unsupported Children Amendment Bill be now read a second time. Mr. Speaker, I rise on behalf of New Zealand First to speak on my bill, and I don't take that lightly, so I appreciate the time of the House, and I wish to start by acknowledging the members of the Social Services Select Committee, Melissa Lee, who was the chair at the time, Phil Heatley, Jan Logie, Asanati Loli Taylor, Sam Lotuinga, Sue Moroney, Alfred Naru, Rajan Prasad, Mike Sabin, Chris Tremaine, and Lewis Awar. I acknowledge them because their support, unanimous support for this bill out of Select Committee, has absolutely nothing to do with me. I acknowledge them because that Select Committee took seriously the submissions of the people who came to speak with them. Submissions like David White, and submissions from Di Vivian, who is the founder and the chair, the president of Grandparents Raising Grandchildren. I hold my breath a little bit, sir. After this speech, I will hold my breath and see who is the first contributor for the government side, and I will listen carefully to what they say, because I know that at the Select Committee there was a will, a genuine will, to support the righting of what is this terrible inequality between these children. So to just quickly recap what this very little bill does, it's not very long for people to read, what this very little bill does is it gives the clothing allowance of at the most $1,600 in a year to orphans and unsupported children who have been taken in by somebody related to them by blood. At the moment, if you are an orphan or an unsupported child and you do not have a family member or a person related to you by blood who can take you in, who is in a position to take you in, and you are placed with foster parents or foster families, you have access to, at a maximum, $1,600 per year for clothing. Now, $1,600 per year doesn't sound like much, but I think what I hope is that the members of the Select Committee, and I hope that all the members of this House, will agree with me that the point of this bill is not actually about the money. It's about the fact, it's about the recognition by this House that if you are an orphan, you are an orphan. If you are unsupported by your immediate family members, then you are unsupported. It doesn't matter into whose home you go from that moment you become an orphan. And again, I challenge any member of those who listen to the submissions on the Select Committee to not agree with that statement when you heard or read David White's submission. And how his grandchildren ended up with he and his wife. And I'm not going to recount that story here because it's their story. And David very kindly came to the Select Committee to tell it to us, to make the point. And he's placed it in a book because it's the story of his daughter and this journey of her children after incredible tragedy. It is a shame that this bill has taken so long to come here. And again, I hold my breath and I hope that it goes forward. Because the grandparents, the kin carers, have been calling out for this assistance for a large number of years, certainly a lot longer than I've been here. And they will do a much harder job than I do when I walk into this place every day. And all they've asked for is the same support. All they've asked for, and it's not for themselves, this clothing allowance can't be spent on an adult's clothing. This clothing allowance can't be spent on anybody's rent or anybody's alcohol or anybody's cigarettes. It can't be spent on anybody else but on the child. And it can only be spent on the clothing for the child. So it's not possible to take advantage It's merely righting what has been a serious discrepancy in equity for these children. I think the other thing that has, that has moved the members of the Select Committee has been the reality, many of them knew, and I also want to acknowledge the Right Honourable Paula Bennett, or the Honourable Paula Bennett. I know, I apologise, I take back the right. But anyway, the Honourable Paula Bennett. Because I know she also has a will to fix this inequity. I recognise, and the Minister was kind enough to place me on a ministerial working party to work around a $10 million fund to put in some immediate supports for these families and these children. That is the School Startup Fund. I think there's been a 73% pickup of that this year. The maximum that there's no requirement to justify your application, but you do need to register for that money. And we would encourage any kin carer caring for an orphan or an unsupported child to do so. But the maximum of that fund is $550 for school startup. And what concerns me is that I'm already hearing that that's just covering summer uniform. And that's another issue we're going to have to deal with, Mr. Speaker, is the fact that in this country, $550 only covers summer uniform inside some state schools. So, and again, we come back to the fact that while it is $550, that's not the point. The point is the legislation right now discriminates against these children merely because a policeman and a SIFS worker showed up at the door of these grandparents or these kin and said to them, these children need a home, will you take them in? That's the single thing that discriminates against them on this issue from foster children. And yet it wasn't, the grandparents didn't seek them out in most of the cases, the state came looking. The state came knocking on the door with these children and said, somebody needs to care for them, will you do it? And just as David White said to his granddaughter when he picked her up from that primary school on that day and she said to him, who will we live with? When he told her that her mother had been murdered by her father, the answer is, with us. Because what else is the answer? And I challenge anybody who has argued against this equity before and used the argument that grandparents just should, well, grandparents just do, but they don't have a limitless bucket of money. Contrary to popular opinion, many grandparents are living on that fixed income, which is the superannuation. Contrary to popular opinion and popular, I guess, perception, these children don't all come smiley-faced rosies. They're not all Annies. They're not all Annies dancing up and down the corridors. They come seriously damaged, many of them. They've seen things they shouldn't see. They've lived through things they shouldn't live through. They have psychological disorders. They require many of the things that cost that bit extra. And again, there was a special fund that these families could apply for out of that $10 million pool, and I'm sure that Mr. Naru, when he contributes, will expand on this. And so that pool is for things above and beyond, extras that can be applied for, and that if the need is accepted by the panel that reviews those can be paid for. And I know at the moment that some of the largest numbers of those requests are for orthodontic treatment. Now, this wouldn't fix that. But what it would do is it would give $1,600 at the most. That's the maximum this bill will do. It would give $1,600 to supplement the clothing, so maybe some other money could be spent on dental work. And before I finish my contribution, Mr. Speaker, there is an amendment that the Select Committee made, and it is around the implementation date of this bill. And it's been, so if this bill does pass through this House, it would come into force on the 1st of July 2018. And I agreed to that because I understand financial constraints. But I just want to add that the 1st of July is my birthday. And so I think it actually was somehow fate that the 1st of July, no matter what year, was taken as the day that this bill would be actually come into force. So I commend this bill to the House and I seek the House's support. Kia ora.